Okay, welcome. Today I'm going to offer some reflections about boarding school and neglect. I'm going to draw from this work of David Howe, Child Abuse and Neglect, who is a university professor, or he was, he's now retired, and I'm going to give some examples from different books. Bear Grylls, David Cameron, John Peel, what were their experiences of boarding school, and linking that into David Howe and his reflections. So, enjoy. Okay, so last week I talked about just childhood neglect and what it is. Today I want to draw that line between boarding school and neglect. Reading quite a lot of books, as I shared last week, seems to be quite a few references to neglect in the text of Bessel van der Kolk, Gabor Mate, or even Judith Herman. And, as I'm reading the definition, so if I just go with the definition to start off with of what is neglect, I'll read this from the NSPCC. So, neglect is the ongoing failure to meet a child's basic needs and the most common form of child abuse. A child might be left hungry or dirty or without proper clothing, shelter, supervision or health care. So if I begin with the hungry one, I mentioned this before, a video about a month ago, but David Cameron, in his biography for The Record, he says about his time at boarding school, he went at age 7, and he says, the food was Spartan. I lost a stone in weight during a single term. There was one meal that consisted of curry, rice and maggots. In the school grounds were woods and a lake where we could play unsupervised in green boiler suits. It is something of a miracle that no one drowned. So just thinking about that, it's like, is that neglect? That they're just left to play on their own? And I'll read some of David Howe's work, but just this idea that, he's lost a stone in weight. And if we put this into context, as I shared in a video a month ago, is that the average weight of a 7 or 8 year old, and if you look at David Cameron's photos, he's not overweight as a child. You can see a picture of him here, probably can't see it very well. This is him here. He's just normal weight, and so they say in that the average weight of a 7-year-old is 3 stone 8 pounds, or for an 8-year-old is 4 stone. So if you lose 1 stone, that is a quarter of your body weight. If you can put that into context, if you're 10, 11 stone now, you lose a quarter of your body weight, you go down to 7.5. I would be skin and bones if I went down to 7.5. So if you could just put that into context there about David Cameron. The other thing here is David Howe, he talks a lot about institutionalized children, and and we call it looked after children in care. And I'll read out some Joy Schaverien, but coming back to Louis de Bernière, who spoke up about his own boarding school experiences, I think it was last year. He says boarding schools are really orphanages for children who have parents. Yeah, boarding schools are really orphanages for children who have parents. And then Joy Schaverien, in her book, Boarding School Syndrome, page 7, she says, the term looked after children and young people is generally used to mean those looked after by the state. The term is also used to describe accommodated children and young people who are looked after on a voluntary basis at the request of or by agreement with their parents. We refer to these children as children in care. And then so that was NSPCC. The Joy then goes on to say the definition of children in care seems to fit the child in boarding school. Okay, so then if I move on to David Howe's work, so what he's saying here is in an institutionalized environment where there are very few staff who come and go, who are overstretched and busy, though many might be caring, the children who cry loudly and smile warmly whenever they capture someone's attention are likely to receive most notice. So in most boarding schools, again, this has changed, but certainly the time that I was at school, there was 50 to 60 boys and girls to one teaching staff on duty. So what they're saying is very few staff. They're overstretched. David Cameron's again saying they were just left to roam in their boiler suits, surprised that no one drowned. Yeah. So in my school, we had a boy on the year below me, I've spoken of him before, who used to get hit and bullied, and he used to scream. And the housemaster used to give him quite a lot of attention. But after a time, he used to get quite cross with him. And David Howe goes on, he says, however, many children experience environments that are even more deprived. Carers are either absent, are infrequently available, or are deeply disengaged. If they do respond, it is perfunctory, without warmth or animation. To all intents and purposes, children find themselves in a non-caring, harsh world of extreme and chronic neglect. Displays of attachment behaviour have little impact. So after a time, the boy who was crying, the school as a whole, I remember one mealtime, he was being kicked under the table, and he screamed out, "Ow!" And all of the school went, "Shut up!" and then said his name. And so he's trying to reach out and say, I've got a problem here. But his display of attachment behaviour have little impact. David Howe goes on to say, there is little crying, no smiling, and an absence of eye contact. The attachment system appears to shut down. When there are no adults, or when carers are deeply neglectful, children are unable to develop any kind of attachment strategy that might even marginally increase the responsivity and availability of adults. So this is important, because as an ex-boarder, neglect, as I've shared before, we become insecurely attached. Anne Power has written about that in her journal articles, that even if you're securely attached, before you go to school, you become insecurely attached. So what David Howe is saying, the attachment system appears to shut down. We become avoidant. Most ex-boarders I know are insecurely attached. They're avoidant. They keep intimacy at arm's length. That's why they struggle in relationships. But we've also got disorganized. We might be very needy. Or on the other hand of things, we might be ambivalent as well. Disorganized and ambivalent, yes. And then if I read a little bit more of David Howe's work, contrast all this with children who suffer severe deprivation and chronic neglect. Who helps them explore their own thoughts and feelings? Where do they go to understand how they tick psychologically? Not only do they have extreme feelings of fear and confusion with which to deal, but they also have the least responsive and understanding environment to help them make sense of it. So if I link that into Bear Grylls' book, Blood, Sweat and Tears, he says something very telling about fear. Say that. Yeah, a few entirely innocent boys seem to get picked on by one or two bullies. These bullies would truly make life hell for the hapless victims, not only physically but also emotionally, systematically alienating their victims and teasing them relentlessly and heartlessly. And then he goes on to say, page 58, when I hit school, suddenly all I felt was fear Fear forces you to look tough on the outside, but makes you weak on the inside. That was the opposite of all I had ever known as a kid growing up. And he goes on to say, I meet lots of folks nowadays who say how great boarding school is as a way of toughening kids up. That feels a bit back to front to me. I was much tougher before school. He says coping with fear was the big one, the fear of being left and the fear of being bullied, both of which were very real. He says conversely, those Sunday night drives back to school were truly torturous. Give me SAS selection any day, and that was bad, trust me. So here he's talking that going back to school and that fear of going back to school was worse than SAS selection, which is meant to be the most torturous environments ever. So just offering some suggestions here. And, you know, seeing that when we do that, when we are in this neglectful kind of environment, David Howe says that at best, therefore, the internal working model will represent the self as unlovable and without value. At worst, the very notion of the self lacks shape and coherence. The boundaries between the self and others are diffuse. Needs, desires and wants will not be regulated by thought, reflection and social understanding. Yeah. And he also says the dominant experience of severely deprived children is that other people at times of need and distress are simply not available. Since they have had little experience of mindful care, relationships are experienced as of little value, import or significance, and less as a means to an end. And I see this is one of our struggles as an ex-boarder, is that we have been neglected, and therefore in relationships we see it as a means to an end, and that's why we struggle in marriages. We think it's about taking. It's about what we can get, rather than actually what a relationship is about, a place where we can go to give. And I suggest that is something we need to start to do, is one, give to ourselves. If we have been neglected, the chances are we are still neglecting ourselves now. What we need to do is start to, self-care, right? What can I do, right? Get to bed early, eat well, exercise, time with friends, with loved ones, bring joy in, not just working, taking care of self and then taking care of others. The chances are, if we've grown up in this model of neglect, then we're going to not be turned into the needs of others, like he's saying here. Yeah. And so they invest nothing in relationships. We can turn that around by investing in relationship. Give our loved ones hugs. Give them presents. Give them actual physical presents. Pay attention. Drop our work. These are all things I can struggle with. It's like, right, how do we do this? So yeah, I'm interviewing David on Monday. So the podcast will be going live next Friday. And the filming a couple of weeks ago went really well. Just putting together the promo. The director is at the moment, just so we can start putting it out there and start to fundraise so we can get the film completed. So yeah, any questions, please do let me know. I didn't talk about John Peel here, but maybe another time. Some very interesting insights in there as well. Okay, thank you so much for your time. Blessings.